Hello StreetSnappers and welcome to today's video, which is all about the late great Tony RayJones, documentary and street photographer. This video is not so much about the man himself, but about his approach, which he laid bare in this notebook page that has become quite an iconic bit of personal writing. And he laid bare his approach in this little page. It was his manifesto, his aide memoir, his 13 memory joggers to how he would approach his work. It was a kind of note to self, a set of prompts that reminded him what he needed to be doing to keep himself on track. And some of these points are as valid today as they were when they were penned in the late 1960s. But what can we learn from this little page? From a notebook. Let's have a look. Tony RayJones, or TRJ as I'll call him, occupied that very interesting space where street meets documentary photography. Many of his images, and I guess his projects, were as much about social documentary as they were candid images of the street life. There was always a message in there, a view, a perspective on life. He was truly fascinated by the eccentricities of the English social customs, English people. And he spent the latter half of the 1960s travelling across England, photographing what he believed was a disappearing way of life. His images were humorous on the one hand, melancholic on the other. And it's clear to see how his images had a profound influence on more contemporary social documentary photographers such as Martin Parr. Sadly, Tony is no longer with us, and tragically he died of leukemia at the age of just 30. But we should certainly be celebrating his legacy, which is a glorious body of work, largely in black and white, in which a set of social messages are entwined with a whimsical, playful perhaps, photographic spin. So let's dissect Tony's approach, dealing with each point in turn and exploring what it means for us today. What can we learn from him? I'll go through each of his points, interlacing them with some of his great images. Let's have a look. So this first point, be more aggressive. Like most of the points on this page, this one is open to interpretation, and I don't think he meant to be aggressive with the people he was shooting. I think it was more like being assertive with himself in order to get the picture he wanted. Maybe have more staying power, more perseverance, a will to get the job done. So if my interpretation is right, this is a pretty good starting point and a position we should all be adopting. So here's the second point, get more involved, talk to people. Now, we know that street photography tends to be largely candid photography, whereas documentary photography gives us more scope to engage with our subjects. Any interaction before the shutter fires could affect the scene, and the picture won't be what the photographer saw. But looking at TRJ's work, I'd say a lot of it was candid, but there are certainly some situations where some interaction really helped. Street portraits is an obvious example, which many of us do today. But with a lot of documentary work, there is scope for the photographer to become involved, to engage with the subject, even if it's for something as simple as provoking a bit of eye contact. If you've seen that documentary that was put out, I think a couple of years ago now, about Don McCullin, you'll see that even for his street images, there's a warm interaction with subjects, and it clearly pays off. So here we are on to the next note, take simpler pictures. Tony was on a mission to take uncluttered images where the main subject matter shone through from any distracting background. Simple, crisp, clear compositions. And this is a great thing to keep reminding ourselves of. It's something we often forget, I think. Just look at what you could call outstanding street photography today. I'm guessing that simplicity is a common theme. So on to the next point, which is stay with the subject matter. Be patient. And this is great advice. Don't just rock up to the scene, grab your shot and then walk away. Take your shot first, almost certainly an instinctive one. Then think how you could do it differently, how you could do it better. Try a different viewpoint, maybe an alternative perspective. Maybe try different exposure settings for a different effect. Or maybe just wait and stay with the scene. Watch it evolve. See what's going to happen next. We call it working the scene, and it nearly always works. It's a good approach to try. Don't give up on the shot when you've then taken it. So the next one is see if everything in the background relates to the subject matter. And another interesting point, street photography is all about context, and the background often contributes something to the image. And this is one of the reasons we usually use a small aperture, ideally f8 or smaller, for street photography. Sometimes we're shooting in a hurry and we don't have time to think about the background. But if we do have time, we should always consider what it brings to the party. Does it add to the main subject? Does it detract from it? What does it contribute? And if there's time, maybe we can change our position to make the background work just a little bit harder for us. So the next point, vary compositions and angles more. This is the first of 3 notes on here, which I think are interrelated. And I think Tony was reminding himself here to be a bit more experimental, maybe less conventional with his compositions. Maybe challenging some of the accepted norms for composition and bringing a little bit more energy into his shot making. The next one, which I think is closely related, be more aware of composition. And maybe the key thing here is to slow down and to think more about the composition. Street photographers, or if they're anything like me, are always in a hurry. And I see a lot of potentially great street images which could have been significantly better with a little more thought. I know we like to think we're rule breakers, we're cavalier rebels who are not too worried about boring stuff like composition and rules, and I'm as guilty as anyone here. But there are times when maybe a little bit more attention to detail makes good sense. So on to the next note. Don't take boring pictures. This is my favourite, and I find myself telling myself this every single day. And of course, it's highly subjective. One man's meat is another man's poison and all that. But I think Tony does have a point here, and I think this is something we're all guilty of from time to time. And I know I keep banging on about this in my videos, but does the world really need another picture of a woman sitting in a cafe window, doing nothing in particular? Or a guy crossing the road with his dog, or some random guy walking past some street art, or endless shots of people's backs? I think there's often, we feel the need to come home with at least some keepers after a day out on the street. And I think this can cloud our judgment sometimes. And to be quite honest, I'll often end the day with nothing, no keepers. But that's fine. I've still had a great day, and I'd rather have nothing than a card full of what I would consider to be boring shots. So I think Tony's overall message here is be a bit more discriminating. So his next message is getting closer, use a 50mm lens. And this is one of those evergreen street photography rules, which of course were designed to be broken. But there is some merit in this one, I think. Street photography is generally about being close, as close to the action as we can get. And if you're shooting from across the road with a long lens, there'll be very little connection with the scene that you're shooting. But if you're right in there with a 28 or a 35mm lens, or even a 50, your images will certainly exude a sense of energy or emotion or intimacy, and certainly a stronger sense of connection. And this is all what we need in street photography. And this comes back to the previous point about not taking boring pictures. But I think we have to remember at this point that these notes were made by Tony as a note to himself, not as advice to us lot, and I'm just giving you my interpretation of his notes, and who's to say he was right or who's to say I'm right. So his next note was, watch camera shake, shoot at a 250th or above. And personally, I've always used a 250th of a second as the slowest acceptable speed certainly for daytime street photography. Anything below that, and we run a risk of camera shake or subject blur. If the light isn't great, I would always whack up the ISO rather than accept a slower shutter speed, as I'd always, anytime, prefer a slightly noisier image than a blurry image. So I think good advice there. Don't shoot too much. I think this point is related to, again, don't take boring pictures. But again, maybe be a bit more selective. This is one of the reasons I recommend that people new to street photography start off using film. It makes you much more self-discriminating, more selective about what makes a good picture and what doesn't. And of course, if you're using film, an indiscriminate approach is going to cost you a lot of money. And I must confess that the more years that I shoot, the fewer images I take. So maybe give film a try, but don't shoot too much. So his next point, not all eye level. If you shoot everything at eye level, your pictures risk having a very similar, maybe predictable look. Try shooting at a low level. Vary the camera angle. Try a very low level, or raising the camera above your head. Think about what a different angle could say about your picture. How will it affect the mood or the message you're trying to get across? How could it alter the narrative? We've got to think about things like this. So on to his final point of the 13 points. He says no middle distance in big letters at the bottom of his note. To be perfectly honest, I'm not exactly what TRJ was referring to here. Maybe he was thinking about layers, where the image has, say, a foreground, a middle ground and a background, all of which add something to the picture. Or maybe he was suggesting that we should look outside the obvious middle distance zone for some additional interesting subject matter on the basis that our eyes tend to zone in on that middle distance. Who knows? I mean, this is quite a murky one, but no middle distance. What do you think? How would you interpret that? So there we have it. Tony RayJones notes to himself. So now what? Well, what about writing something like this for yourself to help you remember what's important and what works for you? Maybe develop your own manifesto, your own list of things that you should be doing, your 10 commandments. It's something I'm certainly going to think about, and I'm going to write down my 10 commandments and have them with me in my bag. So that's about it for today. Thanks as always for watching. I hope you found that useful. I'd love to read your comments below. I'll try to get another video out before the festive break, but if not, have a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful festive season, however you celebrate it, and I hope to catch up with you soon. Bye for now.